The header snapped on a Thursday. Not gradually, not with a wobble, or a belt squeal, or the kind of warning a person can hear and bargain with. It snapped all at once, in a hot gust of October wind, with 286 acres of black-headed sunflowers still standing in the west quarter. And a note at the bank due in 13 days. June Halvorsen shut down the machine, climbed out of the cab of her 1978 Gleaner L2, and stood in the dust of Thomas County, Kansas. One hand on the ladder, one hand on the brim of her cap, she did not curse, she did not kick the tire, she did not even look surprised. She just stared out across the field where the sunflower heads tilted like dark coins under the pale high plains light. And then she looked down at the soil between the rows. What she decided in that field would save her farm, make half the county think she had finally lost her mind, and quietly, very quietly, change the way people around Colby looked at stubble, snow, and the ground under their boots. To understand why, you have to understand the year. It is 1986, and western Kansas is living inside the long aftershock of the farm crisis. Interest rates had broken men who looked unbreakable. Land bought high in the late 70s was now carrying debts that made sense on paper, and nowhere else. Implement dealers had become part mechanic, part undertaker. Auction notices curled on bulletin boards in feed stores and diners. Families who had survived hail, grasshoppers, blizzards, and drought were being taken apart by monthly statements printed on clean white paper. Thomas County sat on the short grass high plains, where the horizon was so wide it could make a person feel brave or small depending on the hour. The earth there was a study in patience. A few inches down, the better fields held a dark, root-rich top layer built by prairie grasses over centuries. Beneath that weighted tighter ground, lighter ground, sometimes caliche, sometimes a stubborn clay that would shed rain if you treated it wrong. Wind mattered there as much as rainfall. Snow mattered. Residue mattered. Everybody knew that in theory, very few people farmed like they believed it. June Halvorsen did. June was 57 in the fall of 1986. She was a widow, 5'6", raw-boned and strong in the dry, efficient way of someone who had done hard things too long to waste motion. Her father had broken sod in Sherman County with horses. Her husband, Nels Halvorsen, had died of a heart attack in 1982 while changing sweeps on a blade plow. After that, June had kept the place going herself, with the help of one hired hand in harvest and her nephew when he could spare weekends. She ran 910 dryland acres, winter wheat, grain sorghum, sunflowers, and a small patch of alfalfa near the house if the season allowed it. She was not rich, she had never been rich. In October of 1986, she owed $164,000, between land debt, operating paper, and equipment notes. In a good year she could service it. In a hard year she could only rearrange it. But there was something about June that many of her neighbors misunderstood, because she did not advertise it. She read. She read Kansas state bulletins. She read USDA residue management reports out of Akron and Garden City. She read proceedings from soil and water conferences that other people used to level table legs. In the mudroom beside the kitchen she kept 4 fat binders labeled snow, wind, moisture, and fuel. She had been filling them since 1969, the year a March blow lifted a gray veil of her best topsoil off the south quarter and carried it east like smoke. That storm had changed her. For 17 years she had been asking one question in 100 practical forms. What if the ground held more, when we quit beating it open? Most farmers around her still worked a field until it looked clean enough to eat off. Undercut it, sweep it, rod weed it, Disk it if they had to. Make it black. Make it neat. Make it ready. A black field in western Kansas was a point of pride. It meant discipline. It meant you had worked. It also meant the wind had a clear shot at everything valuable. June had not said that out loud for a long time. She knew how farm talk worked. Loud certainty traveled faster than careful evidence. So she had spent winters in the machine shed instead, learning. Now every story like this needs a man who believes the world has already explained itself to him. Outside Colby, that man was Wade Kester. Wade was 46, broad in the shoulders, still thick through the middle, with iron pearl snap shirts and a way of holding a styrofoam coffee cup like he was chairing the hearing. He farmed nearly 3,000 acres, some owned, most rented from families who had gotten old or gotten beat. He ran big equipment, newer equipment, expensive equipment. He believed in clean tillage, chemical certainty, and speed. He undercut his wheat stubble twice, sometimes 3 times, before spring planting. He liked a field to look black enough in April that a crow would hesitate before landing. He was not a monster. He was in the way of prosperous men, oversupplied with confidence, and undersupplied with curiosity. If someone had less than he had, he usually assumed there was a reason, and that the reason was not bad luck. When word got around that June's header had failed, and her sunflowers were still standing, Wade had opinions immediately. The Thomas County Conservation District held a winter meeting every January in a low beige room behind the co-op on the south edge of town. Metal chairs, burned coffee, a slide projector if they were feeling ambitious. Tuesday of January, with 38 farmers in the room and a young agronomist from Kansas State trying to talk about residue cover percentages, Wade asked the question everybody had come to hear answered. "June," he said, turning in his chair, "you ever get that west quarter finished?" June was in the second row, with a yellow legal pad on her lap. She looked up. "No." A few men shifted. Somebody coughed into his sleeve. Wade smiled the way men do when they are about to be generous in public. "Can still get a custom machine on it, if that's the trouble. Might lose some seed, sure, but better than abandoning the whole thing." "I'm not abandoning it," June said. "Well, what do you call leaving 286 acres standing through winter?" June set her pencil down. "Preparation." The room changed. "For what?" Wade asked. "For spring." He let out a short laugh and looked around for company. "Spring, June. Those stalks will be a tangled mess by then." "That's what I'm counting on." "What exactly are you planning to do?" June folded her hands over the legal pad. Her voice did not rise. It never needed to. "I'm going to plant sorghum straight into that sunflower ground in April. No blade plow, no disc, no undercutting. I'm going to leave the stalks standing through snow season and let them hold what winter gives me." For a second, nobody moved. Then Wade laughed, openly this time. "You're going to plant milo into standing sunflower stalks." "That's right." "With what?" "That old 8-row white you've been patching with salvage yard iron." "That one." Wade leaned back. "June, that isn't farming. That's desperation dressed up as an idea. You can't ask a planter to run through that trash. You'll hairpin residue, cool the soil, ruin your stand, and spend the summer looking at skips." June said nothing. He kept going because silence is gasoline to men like that. "You want to save moisture. Fine. Everybody wants to save moisture. But you don't save a crop by refusing to work the field. You save it by doing the work. Black dirt warms. Black dirt plants clean. Black dirt yields." That was the consensus in the room, or had been for so long that nobody had bothered to challenge it aloud. Then June said the sentence people would remember long after they forgot the meeting. Black dirt also blows. Nobody laughed at that. Wade's smile thinned. So now we're letting the weather do our tillage for us. No, June said. I'm letting the stalks stop the wind, and I'm letting the snow stay where it lands. The agronomist from Kansas State, a young woman named Dr. Elena Mora, started to say something about standing residue, snow catch, and evaporative loss, but Wade was already shaking his head. Come July, he said, you'll wish you had worked that quarter. I'm telling you as a neighbor. June nodded once. I expect you are. She didn't argue. She didn't lecture. She didn't pull out a single figure from the yellow pad. She just wrote one word across the top of the page in block letters. Wait. That is what she had been doing for 17 years. Because June Halvorsen had not stumbled into the idea. She had been building toward it piece by piece, failure by failure, season by season, in a way that almost nobody around her had noticed. The first thing she had learned was that western Kansas does not really have one moisture season, it has three. What falls from the sky in spring, what stays in the ground from winter, and what you fail to waste before summer gets there. Most farmers paid attention to the first one and prayed over the third. June had become obsessed with the second. Standing residue traps snow. That mattered on the high plains more than many people admitted. 6 inches of dry, wind-driven January snow laid into upright stalks could melt slowly and move into the profile, instead of skating west to east across bare ground or vanishing under sun and wind. Residue also shaded the soil, slowed evaporation, softened raindrop impact, kept the surface from sealing, and protected the fragile structure built by roots, fungi, insects, and time. In one binder she kept a photocopy of a Great Plains study showing that heavy surface cover could reduce wind erosion by more than 90% compared to bare fallow. In another she had a chart from USDA work in Colorado showing improved infiltration rates under residue-managed systems. She was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to survive a climate. The equipment problem had held her back. Everyone who talked bravely about no-till or direct planting at meetings had a line in the talk where reality intruded. You needed the right machine. A conventional planter dragged into heavy residue would bunch, plug, or drop seed into a trench stuffed with stems instead of soil. Commercial no-till setups existed by the mid-80s, but they cost money June did not have. So she had done what quiet farmers have always done when money was scarce and the idea mattered more than appearances. She built her own answer. In the winters after Nels died, while most people in town assumed she was simply hanging on, June spent evenings in the machine shed with a trouble light, a coffee can of bolts, and a welder. Her old white 54008 row planter had good bones and a seed meter she trusted. She stripped off what she didn't need, reinforced what she did, and added what the field would demand. Triple coulters cut from an abandoned beet cultivator near Goodland. Homemade residue shields. Heavier down-pressure springs, scavenged from 2 broken drills. Spiked closing wheels adapted from a magazine photo she had cut out 3 winters earlier. Gauge wheel adjustments she had worked out with cardboard shins, pencil notes, and stubborn repetition. By January of 1986, she had a planter that looked ugly enough to invite laughter, and precise enough to matter. Her total cash investment in the modifications was $463.25. Her total faith in them was harder to count. Winter passed. The sunflower field stood. From the county road it looked strange, almost wrong. A whole quarter of tall gray stalks rattling through the wind, while the worked ground around it lay shaved and open. More than one driver slowed to stare. Some called it laziness. Some called it heartbreak. A few called it what Wade Kester had called it in the diner one morning when he thought June could not hear him. "Fence posts," he said. "She's growing fence posts." Then February brought 2 narrow snows, one after the other, and people started noticing something odd. On Wade's black worked ground, the drifts slid and scattered. Fence lines caught what they could. The rest skated on. On June's west quarter, the standing sunflower stalks held it. Not in theatrical drifts, not in white monuments, just in thousands of little catches, ribbed across the field, where wind lost its speed and winter stayed put. June noticed. So did Dr. Mora, who drove out one morning with a soil probe and a notebook. In March, the real test came. A 3-day wind event out of the southwest hit the county hard enough to push dust over Highway 24 and sandblast young wheat on the lighter fields. There fallow moved. Road ditches filled. Fence corners furred with drifted soil. Men came home with grit in their teeth and said things they had said every spring for 20 years about how that was just Kansas. June walked the west quarter after the blow and found the soil where she had left it. Not untouched. Nothing on the high plains is untouched, but held. That mattered more to her than any argument ever had. Planting started the 3rd week of April. The morning she took the white planter into the sunflower field was cold enough that her hands hurt through gloves. The stalks stood weathered and gray. Snowmelt had darkened the ground between them. Meadowlarks were making noise from the fence. The sky had that thin, hard blue western Kansas gets in spring before the day warms enough to pretend at kindness. June lowered the planter and eased forward. The coulters met the old sunflower roots and rattling stalk litter with a metallic tearing sound. First 100 yards, she kept one hand hovering near the hydraulic lever and watched each row unit like a mother watching 8 children cross a highway. The planter shivered, cut, parted residue, pressed seed into dark, cool soil, and closed the slot behind itself. It did not plug. At the end of the pass she climbed down, knelt in the row, and dug with her fingers. Seed at the right depth. Good contact. Residue still covering the surface. She stood up slowly. For a moment she let herself feel it. Not triumph. Not yet. Only recognition. The thing she had imagined alone in a machine shed was now happening in a field large enough to ruin her if it failed. By noon, 3 pickups had parked along the road. Men got out and leaned against doors pretending to be casual. By late afternoon, Wade Kester drove by in a newer truck than June liked to look at, and slowed enough to watch one full pass before pulling on. He did not wave. June planted 62 acres that first day. The next morning she planted another 70. The field looked rough when she finished, rougher than a clean worked quarter ever would. Gray stalks, dark strips, loose residue. A person raised on black dirt and straight lines could look at it and see only trouble. Trouble arrived on schedule. The first week of May stayed cool. The second brought 2 nights of sharp wind and low temperatures that slowed emergence. On the worked ground around the county, sorghum and warmer, exposed soil came up faster. June's field lagged. A man with no patience could drive by and conclude the experiment had already failed. Several did. Wade stopped at the mailbox one afternoon, while June was carrying diesel cans to the shed. "Heard your stand slow," he said. "It's early. It's patchy too, from what I saw. I've seen the field." He shifted his weight, watching her face for something that looked like regret. "Still time to work it over and replant if you decide to get practical." June set the cans down. "Practical is the only reason I'm doing it." That irritated him, because it denied him the comfort of feeling wiser. Then the bank called. A loan officer from Colby, young enough to shave optimism onto his face every morning, asked whether the delayed stand was going to affect June's operating outlook. She said she would know more in 10 days. After she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table and studied her notes until the coffee went cold. This was the darkest part of it, though nobody looking from the road would have known. Not the meeting, not the laughter, not even the broken header. This. The weeks after the field is planted and before it declares itself. Spended time when a person has already paid the cost of a decision, but has not yet received a single favor from it. June walked rows every evening. Some sections were fine, some were thin where residue mats had interfered with closure, some low spots were slower than she liked. She made stand counts in pencil. She recalculated seating assumptions. At night she lay awake listening to the house shift in the wind and wondered whether she had mistaken preparation for wisdom. Then in late May the county caught a hard rain, not a gentle one, a fast, slanting, pounding high plains rain that drums on tin roofs and runs in sheets off machine sheds. 2.5 inches in less than a day. The next morning the difference began to show. Worked fields wore it badly, crusting, sealing, fine rills where water had found slope and taken soil with it. In some places seedling sorghum struggled to break through the baked surface that formed after the ground dried. June's west quarter had taken the rain another way. The residue softened the strike, water slipped between stalks and litter, slowed, entered. The surface stayed open. The unworked soil held its pore structure. Where roots from the previous crop had died, channels remained. Where worms had moved, tunnels remained. Where tillage would have collapsed them, they were still there. 3 days later the sorghum in June's field caught up. By the first week of June it had done more than catch up. It had evened out. By the second week it had become the kind of field people found excuses to drive past. The rows were not visually perfect. June's field never had the magazine cover cleanliness Wade liked. But the color was wrong in a way that mattered. It was darker, cooler, alive in a different register. When afternoon wind climbed and the county's worked fields started to take on the gray-green cast of strain, June's quarter held a deeper tone. Dr. Mora came back with probes, a thermometer, and a graduate student who wrote everything down. At 6 inches, June's residue-managed quarter was holding markedly more moisture than a comparable bare field half a mile away. At 2 inches, soil temperature under the residue was lower during heat peaks. The surface aggregation was intact. There was almost no sign of wind scouring. Wade Kester did not need the numbers to understand what he was seeing. He needed July. July of 1987 came in hot and stayed that way. It was not the apocalyptic drought of older stories, not dust-choked and headline-worthy, but it was the kind of punishing high-plains summer that reduces a crop one afternoon at a time. Day after day of wind, sun with Wade in it, humidity so low a man could hang sweat in the air for half a second before it vanished. The county's worked sorghum fields began to show it by mid-month. Leaves rolled earlier each day. The lighter ground gave up first. The harder ground held a little longer and then gave up too. Bare interrows baked. Whatever moisture had not run off in May climbed toward the surface and left. June's west quarter looked different from the road and startlingly different from inside it. The standing old sunflower stalks were gone at eye level now, slowly collapsing into the system. But their work remained. Residue still covered the rows. Shade still broke the heat at the surface. The soil below stayed friable longer into the day. When June pushed a spade into the profile near the end of July, she found usable moisture deeper than she had any right to expect. Dale Morrow, who farmed one section east, walked out with her one evening after supper. He took off his cap, knelt, pressed the dirt in his palm, and looked up. "I'm dry at 8 inches, he said. June nodded toward the spade mark. "I've still got hold at 14. He looked across her field, then back toward his own. And that was the moment the county really began to change. Not in a meeting, not with a speech, not because a university person said a thing with a chart. Because one farmer touched the difference. By August, the story had escaped the quarter and entered the county bloodstream. At the elevator, at church, at the parts counter, at kitchen tables where wives balanced overdue bills against the price of diesel and asked whether there might be another way to do this without working themselves to death and watching the wind carry money east. Wade Kester got quieter. Not humble, not yet, but quieter. Harvest came in September under a high, pale sky with enough breeze to keep dust moving and enough mercy to keep machinery running. June had located a used replacement header by then, and paid for it with money she absolutely did not enjoy spending. She drove into the West Quarter with more fear than she had shown anybody, because all summer a field can look promising and still betray you in the hopper. The first pass ran strong. The second pass confirmed it. The field monitor she had cobbled together with a weigh wagon, notebook math, and too much care put the early strips in the mid-50s. She did not trust it until the wagon scale agreed. By the time she finished, the quarter had averaged 57.8 bushels per acre in a year when much of the county's dryland sorghum came in between 34 and 42. 57.8. On a field that had been laughed at in January, on moisture held by snow, residue, and refusal, on a planter built in a shed by a widow people thought was merely trying not to sink. June parked the combine at the field edge, climbed down, and stood in the stubble where the old sunflower roots were still holding the ground under the sorghum. Then she took out the yellow pad she kept in the cab and wrote 3 lines. Yield. Moisture held. Do it again. That fall's Conservation District meeting was crowded. More chairs had to be brought in. Men stood along the back wall. Dr. Mora was there with slides this time, but she hardly needed them. Everybody had already seen enough from the road, the elevator tickets, or a trusted neighbor's mouth. Wade Kester sat in the front half of the room, and for the first 40 minutes, said almost nothing. Then someone asked June what she had changed on the planter. She answered in plain terms: coulter diameter, spring pressure, residue shields, closing wheels, planting speed, the need to leave enough cover to matter, instead of bragging it away with steel. Nobody wrote faster than Wade. She did not gloat. That is important. She did not go back for the insult in January. She did not name the men who had laughed. She simply described what the field had taught her and what the data supported. Fuel use per acre, down sharply. Passes across the field, cut by more than half. Visible soil movement during spring wind events, almost nil. Stored moisture at planting, measurably higher. Yield in a dry summer, better than anything on that quarter in 6 years. When she finished, nobody laughed. In 1988, June direct planted wheat behind sorghum. In 1989, she took the whole place into reduced tillage, and then true no-till, where the residue allowed it. By 1991, she had cut enough fuel, labor, and iron wear out of the operation to make the bank breathe easier. By 1993, the Halvorsen place was being used by Kansas State and the county district as an informal demonstration stop for farmers trying to keep more water in the ground and more money in their pockets. The numbers accumulated. Fuel use fell by roughly a third across the operation. Field work hours dropped so sharply that June could finish planting with 1 tractor where she used to need 2 and a prayer. Soil loss on the lightest quarter, once a chronic open wound, slowed to something the land could finally survive. But the bigger number was harder to print on a handout: time. Because no-till on the high plains was never just about the next crop. It was about staying long enough for the soil to begin trusting you again. Within 5 seasons, the West Quarter showed more surface organic residue than it had in any span since June and Nels took it over. Within 10, infiltration after hard rain was visibly improved. Within 20, a later soil assessment would show measurable gains in topsoil depth on parts of the quarter where everyone used to assume the wind would always win. The county changed with her, slowly, then all at once, the way local revolutions often happen. Dale Morrow converted his lighter ground first. 2 brothers west of Levant tried direct planting into wheat stubble after seeing June's sorghum numbers. By the early 90s, residue management and no-till were no longer fringe talk in coffee shops around Colby. They were part of the language. Even Wade Kester came around, not quickly. Pride is rarely that efficient. He sold a quarter in 1990 to ease debt pressure after several expensive years reminded him that horsepower and certainty do not make weather obedient. In the spring of 1992, according to 3 different people who remembered it the same way, he pulled into June's yard in a dusty pickup, shut off the engine, and stood with his cap in his hands beside the machine shed. He did not apologize in the dramatic way movies like. He said, "Show me the closing wheels." June showed him the closing wheels. He no-tilled 240 acres the next season. That, too, is how change usually happens, not with public conversion, with a private question asked when the cost of being wrong finally exceeds the comfort of pretending. June farmed until 2001, when her knees told her the truth before she was willing to hear it. She leased the ground to a younger family who kept the residue, kept the rotations, and kept the West Quarter covered. As of a later soil survey, sections of that old sunflower field held more topsoil and better aggregate stability than they had when the header snapped. Which brings us to what this story is really about. It is about farming, yes. It is about the high plains and the long farm crisis and the science of residue and moisture and wind. It is about how standing stalks can catch snow, how roots and worms and time can build a structure stronger than anything a blade plow leaves behind, and how a field does not always need more force from us. Sometimes it needs less. But more than that, it is about the difference between noise and understanding. At that January meeting there was plenty of noise. There was machinery noise translated into opinion. There was status noise, acreage noise, the loud confidence of men who had done a thing one way for so long they mistook habit for law. And there was one widow in the second row with a legal pad. A field of standing sunflowers, a pile of debt. 4 binders full of clipped research. And 17 years of quiet work nobody had bothered to count. When the machine broke, the county saw crisis. June saw an opening she had been preparing for without fully knowing when it would come. That is what preparation really is. Not certainty, not swagger, not a speech that wins the room. Preparation is the private accumulation of evidence, skill, and nerve until one bad Thursday in October turns into the first day of a different future. Years later, when a reporter from a farm paper asked June when she had known the field would work, she gave an answer so plain it sounded like something older than advice. "I didn't know," she said. "Knowing isn't the point. The point is whether the ground agrees with you." Then she looked out across the quarter, where the residue lay between the rows and the wind was spending itself above the soil instead of inside it. "The land doesn't care who sounds confident," she said. "It only answers what you do." If you've ever watched someone get dismissed because they were quiet while the louder man held the room, you already know why this story stays with people. The visible success is never the whole story. The harvest is only the part everybody notices. The real work is the reading no one sees, the winter modifications, the notebook math, the patience to look foolish long enough for reality to catch up. That is what saved June Halvorsen's farm. Not luck, not fashion, not surrender. Attention. And on the high plains, where wind can strip a future down to roots if you let it, attention is another word for survival. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. What's one wrong-looking idea you've seen turn out right because someone understood the real rules underneath it? And if you want more forgotten stories where quiet knowledge beats loud certainty, subscribe and stay with us. This story is a historical reconstruction built on documented realities of the 1980s farm crisis, high plains wind erosion, residue management, and the expansion of no-till and conservation tillage across the American plains. June Halvorsen, Nels Halvorsen, Wade Kester, Dr. Elena Mora, Dale Morrow, and the specific events and dialogue in this story are fictionalized for narrative purposes.